Your toddler is on the floor of the grocery store, screaming, because you handed them the wrong color cup. You didn't do anything wrong. They're not broken. And they are absolutely 100% not doing this to manipulate you. What's actually happening inside that tiny skull right now is one of the most fascinating stories in all of developmental neuroscience. And once you understand it, really understand it, you will never look at a tantrum the same way again. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you in the next 20 minutes doesn't just explain the meltdowns. It explains your child, and it might quietly change the way you parent for the rest of your life. Here is the single most important thing you will ever learn about toddler behavior. Your 2-year-old is not choosing to fall apart. They are falling apart because the part of the brain that would stop them from falling apart doesn't exist yet. Not fully, not even close. That part is called the prefrontal cortex, the thin outer layer of brain tissue sitting just behind your forehead. In adults, it acts like the CEO of the entire nervous system. It weighs options. It delays gratification. It reads the room. It says, I'm frustrated, but this is not the right moment to scream. In a toddler, that CEO is not in the building. The prefrontal cortex is the last region of the human brain to mature. Neuroscientists have established through decades of brain imaging research that this region isn't fully developed until a person's mid to late 20s. Not 18, not 15, 25 on average. At age 2, it is barely online. At age 3, it is still mostly offline. The connections between the prefrontal cortex and the emotional centers of the brain, the wiring that makes emotional regulation possible, are sparse, fragile, and deeply unreliable. So when your toddler loses it because their sandwich was cut into rectangles instead of triangles, they are not being irrational. They are being exactly as rational as a brain, with almost no impulse control infrastructure can be. Think about that for a moment. Really sit with it. Now here's what is fully developed in your toddler's brain. The amygdala, the ancient primal alarm system buried deep in the center of the brain. The part that detects threat, triggers panic, and floods the body with cortisol and adrenaline within milliseconds. The part that kept our ancestors alive on the savannah. Your toddler has a fully loaded, hair-trigger emotional alarm system, and almost no mechanism to turn it off. That is not a behavioral problem. That is a developmental reality. And the next time you're on that grocery store floor, I want you to remember this. You are not watching a child misbehave. You are watching a nervous system do exactly what an underdeveloped nervous system does when it hits its limit. The question isn't, why is my child acting like this? The question is, what does my child's brain actually need from me right now? We're going to answer that, but first, let's go deeper into what's actually triggering the alarm. You've probably noticed that meltdowns don't follow logic. The cup is the wrong color. The TV show ended. Their sock has a seam. Their banana broke in half. Their older sibling looked at them. From the outside, these triggers seem absurd. From the inside of a toddler's nervous system, they are genuine emergencies. Here's why. The amygdala, that alarm system we just talked about, doesn't evaluate threats the way an adult brain does. It doesn't ask, is this actually dangerous? It asks one question. Is this different from what I expected? Toddlers are, neurologically speaking, prediction machines. Their developing brains are constantly building internal models of how the world works. What comes next? What things look like? how sequences unfold. This is how they learn. It's how all human brains learn. We build predictions and we update them when reality doesn't match. But in a toddler, that prediction update process is enormously costly. When the expected banana arrives broken, the brain registers a mismatch, a violation of the model, and without the prefrontal cortex to step in and say, "This is fine," adapt, the amygdala treats that mismatch as a threat signal. The stress response fires. Cortisol floods in. The body goes into full alarm mode. And here's what makes this especially important for parents to understand. Once that alarm fires, the prefrontal cortex goes almost completely offline. Researchers call this amygdala hijack, a term first popularized by psychologist Daniel Goleman, building on the foundational work of neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux. The emotional brain takes over. The thinking brain checks out. This means that in the middle of a full meltdown, your child literally cannot think clearly. They cannot process your logic. They cannot hear your explanation. They cannot respond to reason, not because they're choosing to ignore you, but because the neural pathways that would allow them to do that are temporarily overwhelmed. Trying to reason with a child in the middle of a meltdown is like trying to have a conversation with someone while they're sneezing. The biology won't allow it. So what does work? We'll get there. But before we talk about the response, we need to understand one more layer. Because there's a reason some toddlers seem to melt down more than others. And it has nothing to do with parenting failure. If you have more than one child, you already know this truth viscerally. The same parenting, the same home, the same rules, and wildly different emotional intensities. One child rolls with change. Another child loses it when the routine shifts by 5 minutes. Parents often blame themselves for this. They shouldn't. Temperament is real. It is biological. And it is not a reflection of your parenting. Developmental researchers, building on the landmark longitudinal work begun by Alexander Thomas and Stella Chess in the 1950s, and continued for decades since, identified that children arrive in the world with distinct temperamental profiles, patterns of reactivity, adaptability, intensity, and mood that are stable from infancy and appear to have strong biological roots. Some children are what researchers call slow to warm. They take longer to adjust to new situations, new people, new foods, new routines. Others are highly reactive, and their nervous systems respond to stimulation and change with greater intensity than average. Neither of these is a disorder. Neither is a failure. They are variations in how a nervous system is calibrated. What this means practically is that a highly reactive toddler is not more manipulative. They are not worse behaved. Their amygdala is simply more sensitive, quicker to fire, slower to calm. The threshold between fine and overwhelmed is lower. The recovery time after a meltdown is longer. And here's something that often gets missed. Sensory processing plays a massive role in this. The scratchy tag in the shirt, the sound of the blender, the texture of the food. For some children, sensory input that adults barely register arrives with a volume and intensity that is genuinely overwhelming. When a child melts down over a sock seam, they may not be being dramatic. They may be experiencing real physical discomfort that their underdeveloped nervous system cannot modulate. This doesn't mean every meltdown has a sensory cause, but it does mean that dismissing "it's just a sock" without curiosity can miss something real. If your child seems to have a particularly low threshold, melting down frequently, recovering slowly, struggling with transitions more than peers, that is worth noticing. Not panicking over, but noticing. And we'll talk later about what that noticing looks like in practice. But first, let's talk about something that almost every parent gets wrong in the heat of the moment. And it's not what you think it is. Let's be honest with each other for a moment. When your child hits the floor screaming in the cereal aisle, your first instinct, the one that fires before you have time to think, is probably one of three things. You either try to fix it fast, you negotiate, explain, offer alternatives, try to talk them down, or you match their energy. You feel the embarrassment, the frustration, the exhaustion, and it comes out in your voice. Or you go cold. You shut down, disengage, wait for it to stop. All three of these responses are deeply human. All three are understandable, and all three in their own way make the meltdown harder to resolve. Here's why. When you try to reason with a child mid-meltdown, you're sending words to a brain that has temporarily lost access to language processing. The words don't land. They don't help. And often, the intensity of your engagement, the urgency in your voice, the closeness of your face, actually adds more stimulation to a nervous system that is already overloaded. When you match their energy, raising your voice, expressing frustration, you trigger something called emotional contagion. Toddlers are exquisitely attuned to the emotional states of their caregivers. Their nervous systems literally sync to yours. If you are dysregulated, their dysregulation deepens. And when you go cold, when you disengage, turn away, or leave the room, you remove the one thing that can actually help a toddler's nervous system calm down, the presence of a regulated adult. Because here is the truth that developmental neuroscience keeps returning to. Toddlers cannot self-regulate. That skill is not available to them yet. It develops slowly over years through thousands of interactions with regulated caregivers. What toddlers can do is co-regulate, borrow calm from someone else's nervous system. Your nervous system is the tool. Your regulated presence is the intervention. This is called co-regulation, and it is not a soft, feel-good concept. It is a neurobiological mechanism. The polyvagal theory developed by neuroscientist Stephen Porges describes how the autonomic nervous system responds to social cues of safety, specifically the calm face, calm voice, and calm body of a trusted caregiver. When you stay calm, you are not being passive. You are being the most powerful thing you can be in that moment. Be honest with yourself right now. Which of those three responses do you reach for most? Drop it in the comments. There's no judgment here, just awareness. If what you've just heard is shifting something for you, if you're starting to see your child's hardest moments differently, that like button is right there. It genuinely helps more parents find this. And what's coming next is where this gets practical, because understanding the neuroscience is one thing, but knowing what to actually do in the moment, on the floor, in the cereal aisle, that's what changes the day-to-day. We're just getting to that part. So what do you actually do? Not in theory, not in a perfect world. In the real moment, when the screaming has been going on for 4 minutes, and you haven't eaten since breakfast, and there are people staring, here's the framework. It has 3 phases, and the order matters. Before you do anything else, before you speak, before you touch, before you intervene, take one breath, not a dramatic breath, just one slow exhale. Long out-breath activates the parasympathetic nervous system. It physically slows your heart rate within seconds. It shifts your face and your body into the signals of calm that your child's nervous system is scanning for. This is not about you performing calm. It's about you becoming calm enough to be useful. There is a difference. Get low, physically lower than your child if possible. Kneel, crouch, or sit on the floor. This is not a power move. It is a safety signal. Looming over a dysregulated toddler adds threat cues. Getting low removes them. Then, and this is the hardest part, don't try to fix it yet. Don't explain. Don't offer solutions. Don't negotiate. Just be there. A calm body, a soft face, maybe a quiet "I'm here." Experienced child therapists call this holding the space. You are not solving the emotion. You are containing it, providing the external structure that the child's nervous system cannot yet provide for itself. Once the storm begins to pass, once the body starts to soften, the breath starts to slow, that is when language becomes available again. And the most powerful language you can use is simple emotion labeling. That felt really big. You were so frustrated. That was really hard. Research by neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman at UCLA has shown that naming an emotion, putting a word to a feeling, measurably reduces activity in the amygdala. Labeling is not just validating, it is neurologically regulating. Then and only then, you can begin to problem solve. The cup, the banana, the sock, whatever it was. Now the prefrontal cortex is coming back online. Now your child can hear you. The sequence matters. Regulate, presence, name, not explain, not fix, not lecture. Regulate, presence, name. It sounds simple. It is not easy. And we're going to talk about why. Because there's something happening in your own brain during these moments that almost nobody talks about. We talk a lot about the toddler's brain, but almost nobody talks about what is happening in the parent's brain during a meltdown. And it is important, because you cannot give what you don't have. When your child screams, your own amygdala fires. That is not a character flaw. That is biology. Your nervous system is designed to respond to the distress signals of a child, especially your own child, with urgency. The cry of a toddler is one of the most physiologically activating sounds a human brain can hear. Studies measuring parental physiological response to infant and toddler crying consistently show significant spikes in heart rate, cortisol, and skin conductance, the same markers we see in stress and threat responses. In other words, your child's dysregulation is designed at a neurological level to dysregulate you. This is not an accident of evolution. It is the mechanism that ensures caregivers respond to children's distress. The urgency you feel is the system working. But here's the problem. That urgency, if you don't have a way to process it, becomes the thing that makes the meltdown worse, because you bring your activated nervous system into contact with their activated nervous system. And two activated nervous systems in a small space do not calm each other down. This is why parental self-regulation is not a luxury. It is not a wellness trend. It is the actual prerequisite for effective co-regulation. And here's something that often goes unsaid. The parents who struggle most with their child's meltdowns are often the ones who never had their own emotional states acknowledged as children. If you grew up in a home where big feelings were dismissed, punished, or treated as inconvenient, Your own amygdala learned that emotional expression is dangerous. So when your child expresses big emotions, your nervous system responds not just to their distress, but to your own unprocessed history of distress. This is not about blame. This is about understanding. If you find yourself triggered beyond what the situation seems to warrant, if the meltdowns bring up something that feels bigger than the moment, that is worth paying attention to, not with shame, with curiosity, because the research is consistent on this. The single strongest predictor of a child's emotional regulation is the emotional regulation of their primary caregiver, not the parenting technique, not the consequence system, the nervous system of the adult in the room. You matter in this equation. Your own nervous system matters, and taking care of it is not selfish. It is the most direct investment you can make in your child's development. If that landed for you, share this with a parent in your life who needs to hear it, because this is the piece that almost never gets said out loud. Here is the question parents always want answered. When does it get better? The honest answer is gradually and with your help. Emotional regulation is not a switch that flips. It is a skill that is built, neuron by neuron, interaction by interaction, over the first several years of life. And the primary mechanism through which it is built is repeated co-regulation with a trusted caregiver. Every time you stay calm when your child cannot. Every time you name their emotion without shaming it. Every time you hold the space through the storm and then reconnect after. You are literally building neural infrastructure in your child's brain. The prefrontal cortex grows through use. The connections between the emotional brain and the regulatory brain are strengthened by repeated experiences of being regulated, then gradually learning to regulate. This is why child development researchers talk about serve and return interactions, the back and forth of emotional attunement between caregiver and child, as one of the most powerful forces in early brain development. The Harvard Center on the Developing Child has described these serve and return interactions as literally building the architecture of the brain, not metaphorically, structurally. What this means is that your response to your child's meltdown is not just about getting through the moment. It is about building capacity. Each calm, attuned response is a deposit into a developmental account that will pay dividends for decades. By age 3, most children begin to develop what researchers call emotion knowledge, the ability to recognize and name their own emotional states. By 4, many children can begin to use simple coping strategies, asking for a hug, using words instead of bodies, moving away from an overwhelming situation. By 5 and 6, with consistent co-regulation support, children begin to internalize regulatory strategies, to do for themselves what their caregiver used to do for them. This is the arc. It is slow. It is not linear. There will be regressions, especially during illness, sleep disruption, major transitions, or developmental leaps. A child who seemed to be getting better at handling frustration will sometimes seem to go backward. That is normal. That is the zigzag path of brain development. The question is not, why isn't my child over this yet? The question is, am I consistently providing the co-regulation experiences that build the capacity over time? If the answer is yes, even imperfectly, even most of the time, you are doing the most important thing. And the brain is keeping score, even when you can't see the progress yet. Let's zoom out, all the way out, Because this isn't really about the tantrum in the grocery store. That's just the surface. Underneath it is a question that every parent carries, even if they don't say it out loud. Am I doing this right? And will my child be okay? Here is what the developmental science says. Children who grow up with caregivers who respond to their emotional distress with consistent warmth and calm, not perfect, not robotic, but generally regulated and present, those children develop something researchers call secure attachment. And secure attachment is one of the most robust predictors of long-term well-being we have in all of developmental psychology. Securely attached children, children whose early emotional experiences were met with attunement rather than dismissal, show measurably better outcomes across almost every domain we study. Better emotional regulation in school, stronger peer relationships, greater resilience under stress, higher academic persistence, better mental health outcomes in adolescence and adulthood. The connection runs from the floor of the grocery store all the way to the adult your child will become. Now, and this is important, secure attachment does not require perfect parenting. It does not require that you never lose your temper, never disengage, never say the wrong thing. Developmental researchers have consistently found that what matters is not the absence of rupture, but the presence of repair. You can lose it. You can yell. You can walk away to collect yourself. You can get it wrong, and you will get it wrong because you are human. What matters is that you come back, that you repair, that you say, I got frustrated, that wasn't fair, I love you, and you mean it. That repair, the return after the rupture, is itself a developmental experience. It teaches children that relationships survive conflict, that connection can be broken and restored, that they are not responsible for managing the emotions of the adults around them. These are not small lessons. They are the foundation of emotional intelligence. So here is what I want you to take away from everything you've just heard. Your toddler's meltdowns are not a sign that something is wrong with your child. They are not a sign that something is wrong with your parenting. They are a sign that your child has a human brain, a brain that is doing exactly what a young, developing brain does when it hits the edge of its capacity. Your job is not to stop the meltdowns. Your job is to be the steady presence that teaches the brain, over thousands of interactions, how to come back to calm, how to name what it feels like, how to trust that the storm will pass and connection will remain. That is not a small job. It is arguably the most important job there is, and you are doing it. Even on the hard days, even when you get it wrong, even on the grocery store floor, you are doing it. If you've made it this far, you're clearly not looking for quick fixes. You want to understand your child, really understand them. That's exactly the kind of parent this channel is built for. Subscribe because this is what we do here every week. Take the science that lives in academic journals and translate it into something you can actually use at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday when everything is falling apart. There's more of this waiting for you. The tantrum was never about the cup. It was always about a brain learning, slowly, how to be human, and needing you to help it get there. Thanks for watching. The end screen has more videos in the same world. Thanks for being here. Pick whichever video on the end screen calls to you.